Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they never decided clearly, firmly, and finally exactly where they are going. Another year will not save you. Only a plan will. Good evening, friend. I want to talk to you tonight about something quiet. Something that doesn't make noise. Something that doesn't announce itself when it's happening. And yet, when it's gone, you feel it in your bones. I want to talk to you about a year. Not last year. Not next year. I want to talk about this year, the one you are standing in right now, at this very moment. And I want to ask you one honest, uncomfortable, necessary question. Do you have a plan? Not a wish, not a hope, not a vague, floating intention that lives somewhere between your morning coffee and your evening distraction. I mean a real plan, written, measured, followed. Because here is what I have learned after years of studying the men and women who build lives of meaning and achievement. They are not smarter than you. They are not luckier than you. They are not born with something you were denied. They simply decided, early, clearly, and without apology, exactly what they were going to do and exactly how they were going to do it. That is all. And yet that simple act, the act of organizing your intention into a plan, separates the few from the many, the fulfilled from the frustrated, the architect from the wanderer. Let me tell you something about time, friend. Time is the one resource that cannot be borrowed, manufactured, or recovered. Every hour that passes is gone with the authority of a closing door. And most people, good people, capable people, people with every ingredient for a remarkable life, spend their days reacting rather than directing. They wake up and let the world set their agenda. They drift from task to distraction, from distraction back to task, never quite moving in a straight line toward anything they deeply want. And then December arrives, and they sit quietly and wonder where the year went. I'll tell you where it went. It went the same place all unplanned time goes, into the service of someone else's priority, someone else's urgency, someone else's plan. Because here is the truth that nobody talks about plainly enough. If you do not have a plan for your time, someone else does. Now, I am not here tonight to make you feel guilty. Guilt is a poor engine for change. What I want to give you is something far more powerful than guilt. I want to give you a method. Begin with this. Take a single sheet of paper or a screen, if that is your preference, and write down the one thing, the primary thing, that would make this year genuinely meaningful if you accomplished it. Not 5 things. Not a catalog of ambitions. One thing, the thing that, when you imagine it complete, produces a quiet, deep satisfaction somewhere behind your ribs. Write it down. Now here is where most people stop. They write the goal and call it planning. But writing a destination is not the same as drawing a route. A ship's captain does not simply announce where he is going. He charts every degree of the journey, accounts for wind, accounts for current, and makes decisions in advance so that when the storm arrives, he does not have to think. He only has to execute. You must do the same. Break your one great goal into quarters. What must be true by March for this goal to be alive? What must be true by June? By September? Work backward from your destination until you arrive at today and ask what today demands of you. Then do that thing, today, before you answer the world's requests, before the inbox, before the noise. Here is what organization truly is, and I want you to hear this carefully because it is misunderstood by nearly everyone. Organization is not about being rigid. It is not about color-coded calendars or perfect systems or becoming a machine. Organization is simply the practice of deciding in advance so that your future self is not constantly negotiating with confusion. Confused people delay. Organized people act. And action, consistent, deliberate, daily action aimed at a worthy goal, is the only currency that life accepts in exchange for the things you truly want. There is a quote I have carried for many years, and tonight I offer it to you as the center of everything I have said. A plan is not a constraint on your freedom. It is the structure upon which your freedom is built. Read that again. Let it settle. The person without a plan is not free. They are simply unaware of the cage they are living in. Real freedom, the freedom to build, to create, to look back at a year with genuine pride, comes not from doing whatever you feel like in any given moment, but from doing consistently what you decided in your best, clearest, most purposeful moment. That is the life you are capable of. Now I want to speak to you about losing a year, because this is the heart of tonight's broadcast. You may have lost a year already, perhaps several. And if that is true, I want you to understand something important. A lost year is not a failed life. It is a lesson with an invoice attached. The invoice is simply this: now you know what drifting costs. You know the feeling of December with empty hands. Let that feeling serve you now, not punish you. Let it be the fuel, not the anchor, because the calendar does not care about your past. It offers every new morning with the same neutrality, the same clean hours, the same raw potential. What you do with this morning, with this week, is entirely, completely, and wonderfully yours to decide. I want you to sit with something uncomfortable for just a moment. Think about the last time you said the words to yourself, or to someone you trust, "Yes, this is going to be my year." Think about the energy behind that statement, the certainty of it, the feeling that this time something would be genuinely different. You could feel it, couldn't you? That quiet electricity of a fresh beginning. Now I want you to ask yourself one honest question. What happened next? Not in the big dramatic sense. I mean in the very next hour, the very next morning. When the feeling settled and the day began its ordinary demands, what structure were you standing on? What written, specific, measurable intention were you moving toward when you sat down and the world began pulling at your attention from every direction? For most people, the answer is silence, and that silence is the most expensive sound in a human life. You see, there is something deeply seductive about a goal. A goal feels like progress. It feels like movement. A person announces to themselves that they want to build a business, restore their health, strengthen their finances, deepen their relationships, and simply the act of wanting it produces a sensation that closely resembles actually doing it. The mind, in its remarkable and occasionally deceptive way, grants a kind of emotional reward just for the desire alone. And so the desire becomes the destination, the wish becomes the work. The intention becomes the achievement, but only inside the imagination and only for a while. Then reality arrives, as it always does, punctual and unimpressed. Here is what I have come to understand after a lifetime of studying human achievement and the quiet mechanics behind it. A wish and a plan are not cousins. They are not even distant relatives. They are opposites wearing similar clothing. A wish asks the world to cooperate. A plan instructs you on how to move regardless of whether the world cooperates or not. A wish lives in the future. A plan lives in today. A wish is passive. A plan is a daily conversation between who you are and who you have decided to become. When a builder sets out to construct something of lasting value, he does not simply admire the empty lot and feel enthusiastic about what might one day stand there. He draws lines. He calculates load and measure and sequence. He determines what must happen on Monday so that Tuesday is possible. He works from a blueprint, and that blueprint does not restrict his vision. It protects it. You require the same. Your goal, however noble, however sincere, is only the address. The plan is the road. And no man in history has ever arrived at an address by staring at it from a distance, wishing the miles away. Write the plan down. Give it dates. Give it actions. Give it the respect of your most serious and deliberate attention. Because here is the quiet, relieving truth at the center of all of this. You are not behind because you lack ability. You are not behind because the world is against you, or because your circumstances are unusually cruel. You are simply operating a powerful engine without a steering mechanism, and the moment you add that mechanism, everything changes. The goal you have been carrying, sometimes for years, does not need more hope poured into it. It needs a plan beneath it. Build the plan tonight. 1 page, 1 goal, 3 actions. 1 first step for tomorrow morning. That is where the wish ends and the work, the real rewarding, life-changing work, finally begins. I want you to think about something you have probably said, or at least thought, more than once in your life. I have always been this way. Maybe you said it with a small laugh, the kind that carries just enough self-awareness to feel honest, but just enough resignation to avoid real examination. Perhaps someone close to you has heard you describe yourself as scattered or overwhelmed, or someone who simply does not operate well with structure. And somewhere along the way, that description stopped being an observation and became an identity. And that is where the trouble quietly took root. Because here is what happens when a human being accepts a limitation as permanent. They stop questioning it. They stop looking at it with fresh eyes. They arrange their entire life around it, their habits, their excuses, their expectations, and eventually the limitation becomes architecture. It becomes the walls of the house they live in, and they walk past those walls every single day without ever once asking who built them or whether they were built on anything solid at all. Most were not. Most of the things we call our nature are simply our history, repeated long enough to feel inevitable. Now let me tell you what disorganization actually is, because it is profoundly misunderstood by the very people it costs the most. Disorganization is not a wiring problem. It is not a flaw embedded in your character at birth. It is not something you inherited the way you inherited your eye color or your laugh. Disorganization is a pattern of small, daily, mostly invisible choices made not with intention, but with the quiet default of never having decided otherwise. Every morning a person wakes without a clear priority. They have made a choice. Every time an important task is pushed aside in favor of something louder and more immediate, a choice has been made. Every evening a person closes their eyes without reviewing what moved them forward and what held them back. They have chosen unconsciously, habitually, but chosen nonetheless. The accumulation of those choices is what we eventually label a personality. But a pattern chosen can be unchosen. A habit built can be replaced. What has been decided without awareness can be decided again, this time deliberately, this time in your favor. Consider for a moment the most organized person you have ever known. The individual who seemed to move through their days with a kind of quiet authority, who met deadlines not with last-minute urgency but with calm predictability, who you perhaps admired or envied, or quietly dismissed as somehow different from you in some fundamental way. They were not different from you. They were simply practicing a different set of daily decisions made early enough in the morning and repeated consistently enough across time that the decisions themselves became effortless. What looks like discipline from the outside is, at its core, nothing more than a series of small choices that have been made so many times they no longer require negotiation. That is available to you, completely and without exception. Here is the truth I want you to carry from this evening forward. You are not a disorganized person. You are a person who has been making disorganized choices, and the distance between those two statements is the distance between a life accepted and a life designed. Starting tonight, before this day closes, make one organized choice. A single deliberate act of order in place of your usual default. Write tomorrow's most important task on paper before you sleep. Clear one surface. Set one intention. Not because one choice transforms everything immediately, but because one conscious choice proves to you, and this proof matters enormously, that the pattern is not permanent, that you are not fixed, that the identity you accepted without examination can be quietly, steadily, and permanently replaced by the one you consciously choose. And that replacement, friend, begins not someday. It begins with the very next decision you make. I want you to consider something that most people never stop long enough to examine honestly. Where did today go? Not in the broad philosophical sense, I mean practically, specifically hour by hour. If someone asked you right now to account for the last 8 hours of your life with the same precision that a banker accounts for money, could you do it? Could you point to each hour and say with quiet confidence, that hour moved me forward, that hour served my most important purpose, that hour was an investment in the life I am deliberately building? For the vast majority of people, that accounting would be deeply uncomfortable. And somewhere beneath the discomfort is a realization they have been carefully avoiding. Because here is what happens in the life of a person who has never made a conscious decision about their time. The days feel full, genuinely, exhaustingly full. There is always something happening, always something demanding attention, always a reason the important work gets moved to tomorrow. And yet, when months pass and the person looks back at what was actually built, what was actually moved forward, what was actually accomplished, the results are strangely thin compared to the effort that was certainly expended. The activity was real, the progress was not. And that gap between a life that feels busy and a life that produces results is perhaps the most common and most quietly devastating experience in modern human existence. Now I want to tell you something about time that very few people have ever framed plainly enough to be useful. Time is not managed. Time cannot be managed any more than the ocean can be managed. It moves at its own pace, indifferent to your preference, unbothered by your urgency. Every human being alive today, the struggling and the flourishing, the distracted and the deliberate, receives the same 24 hours when the morning arrives. What separates them is not the hours. It is the decision made about those hours before they arrive. The person who controls their destiny is not someone who found more time. They are someone who decided in advance what their time was worth and then defended that decision with the same seriousness that a person defends anything they cannot afford to lose. They understood at some fundamental level that time spent is identical to life spent, that every hour redirected toward distraction is an hour permanently subtracted from the construction of something meaningful. And so they planned, they prioritized, they drew a line between what was genuinely important and what was merely loud. That line is the whole secret. Think about a craftsman working on something of lasting value. A watchmaker, perhaps, bent quietly over his work in the early hours of the morning. Every movement deliberate, every second accounted for in the service of something precise, something worthy, something that will outlast the afternoon. He is not rushed. He is not reactive. He does not stop his most delicate work every time something less important makes a noise in the room. He has decided what deserves his hands, and everything else waits. You are the craftsman. Your life is the work on the table, and every distraction that pulls your attention away from your most important priority is not just an interruption. It is a small, quiet theft that you are permitting. The question is not whether you have enough time. The question is whether you have decided clearly enough what your time is for. Here is where the weight lifts, friend. You do not need to rebuild your entire life tonight. You do not need a perfect system or an elaborate method or a transformation that happens all at once. What you need is far simpler and far more immediately available than any of that. You need one protected hour. Tomorrow morning, before the world presents its requests, before the screen lights up with other people's priorities, before the noise of the day establishes its usual authority over your attention, give one full, uninterrupted, deliberately chosen hour to your most important work. Not to everything, not to the list, to the one thing that, if done consistently over the coming months, would change the trajectory of your year in a way you would feel deeply and permanently. One protected hour claimed before the day can spend it for you. Do that tomorrow, then do it the day after, then the day after that, and watch what happens when a person who once wondered where their time went begins, for the first time, to know exactly where it is going. Your destiny is not written by circumstance, friend. It is written in the way you spend your hours. And that beginning tomorrow morning is entirely, completely, and wonderfully yours to decide. I want you to think about a feeling you know well. That restless, low-grade dissatisfaction that settles in on a Sunday evening or in the quiet minutes before sleep, when the noise of the day has finally stopped, and you are left alone with the honest question of whether you are truly moving toward something or simply moving. That feeling has a name, though most people never call it by its proper name. They chalk it up to stress or fatigue or the general weight of modern living. But it is none of those things. It is the feeling of a person who does not know with clear and specific certainty where they are going, and it visits with remarkable consistency until the moment that clarity arrives. Because here is what an unclear mind does to a capable person. And I want you to follow this carefully because it explains a great deal about why talented, motivated, genuinely ambitious people so often produce results that fall far short of what they are capable of producing. An unclear mind does not rest. It circles. It revisits the same unresolved questions day after day, burning extraordinary amounts of mental and emotional energy not on forward movement, but on the exhausting maintenance of unfinished decisions. Should I pursue this or that? Is this the right direction? Am I wasting my time? The questions repeat because they were never answered firmly enough to stop asking themselves. And while the mind is busy circling, the hours pass. The weeks accumulate. The year closes quietly, and the capable person finds themselves, once again, approximately where they started, not because they lacked effort, but because their effort had no fixed point to travel toward. Now let me tell you what clarity actually is, because it is far more practical and far more accessible than most people allow themselves to believe. Clarity is not a sudden revelation. It is not a moment of mystical certainty that descends on the chosen few while the rest of us wait in the dim hallway of confusion. Clarity is a decision. It is the deliberate act of choosing one direction firmly enough and committing to it seriously enough that the other directions stop competing for your attention. It is not that the person of great achievement never had doubts. It is that they decided before the doubts could govern them. Look at any individual in human history who built something of genuine and lasting significance in science, in commerce, in art, in leadership, and behind every achievement. Without exception, you will find a moment where that individual got quiet enough to ask themselves what they truly wanted, specific enough to answer the question honestly, and courageous enough to commit to the answer without waiting for a guarantee. That sequence, the quiet question, the honest answer, the firm commitment, is the engine behind every great human accomplishment ever recorded. Not talent alone, not circumstance, not luck. Clarity first, always clarity first. Consider an archer standing before a target in the early morning stillness. His equipment is excellent. His physical strength is more than adequate. His desire to succeed is genuine and deep. But if the target is obscured, if the fog has not yet lifted and he cannot see precisely where the arrow must land, none of those advantages serve him. He may draw the bow with perfect form and release with flawless technique, and the arrow will still travel somewhere other than where he intended, because intention without a visible target is simply force without direction. Your goals are the target, and the fog that obscures them is not mysterious or unconquerable. It is simply the result of never having stood still long enough, in a quiet enough moment, to look at the target directly and say that precisely that is where I am aiming. Most people are releasing arrows all day long. Very few have clearly seen their target first. Here is where everything becomes lighter, friend. You do not need more motivation. You do not need more resources or more favorable conditions or more time to think it over. You need 20 minutes of genuine solitude and one honest question answered in writing. What specifically do I want to achieve and by when? Not a broad, comfortable generality. Not, I want to do better or I want to be more successful. Those are not targets. Those are directions without destinations. I mean the specific, measurable, dated version of your most important goal, written in plain language on a real page in your own hand, with a real deadline attached. That single act of written clarity will do more for your forward momentum than months of motivated but unfocused effort. Because the mind, once given a clear and specific destination, does something remarkable. It begins almost immediately to organize everything it encounters around the question of how to arrive there. Opportunities that were always present suddenly become visible. Decisions that once required lengthy negotiation become simple. The energy that was previously consumed by circling is now fully available for moving. That is not philosophy, friend. That is the practical mechanics of how a focused human mind operates when it is finally given a worthy and specific destination. Get clear tonight. Write it down with the seriousness it deserves. And then watch as the fog that has been quietly costing you months and years of misdirected energy begins, at last, to lift. Your capability was never the question. It was always waiting for clarity to lead it somewhere worthy. And that clarity, friend, is one honest decision away. I want you to think about something you have said, perhaps more times than you can count, with absolute sincerity and complete conviction. I just need more time to start the business, more time to write the book, more time to rebuild the health, deepen the relationship, develop the skill, pursue the thing that quietly calls to you every morning before the day crowds in and drowns it out. And the belief behind those words is genuine. You truly feel it, the shortage. The sense that life is moving faster than your capacity to keep up with it, that the hours are too few and the demands are too many, and that somewhere just beyond the current pressure, when things finally slow down, the real work will begin. I want to sit with you in that feeling for just a moment, because it deserves more than dismissal. Here is what that feeling is actually telling you, and I want you to listen beneath the surface of it rather than accepting the first explanation it offers. When a person consistently feels that they do not have enough time, the natural conclusion is a supply problem. Not enough hours, not enough days. And if the problem is supply, the solution is more time, more space, more room in the calendar before anything meaningful can begin. But consider this carefully. The most productive human beings who have ever lived occupied the same 24-hour days that you and I occupy. The individuals who built lasting businesses, created enduring art, raised remarkable families, and contributed meaningfully to the world around them, they did not have access to a different clock. They were not granted extra hours as a reward for ambition. They lived and worked inside the exact same container of time, that feels so insufficient to the rest of us. And yet the results were profoundly different, which means the container was never the problem. What separated them was not the amount of time available. It was the quality of the relationship they maintained with the time they had. And that relationship, when you examine it honestly and closely, comes down to one fundamental practice that most people understand in theory, but almost nobody applies with the consistency it requires. They treated their time as the finite, irreplaceable, deeply personal resource that it actually is, not in an anxious or miserly way, but in the way that a person treats anything they have come to deeply respect, with intention, with selectivity, with the quiet refusal to spend carelessly what cannot be replenished. The average person relates to time the way a person with no budget relates to money. It arrives, it disappears, and the connection between the two events is never quite examined closely enough to produce lasting change. There is always a vague sense that something went somewhere, but the specifics remain conveniently blurry. The person of achievement keeps accounts. They know what an hour costs. They know what a distracted morning subtracts from the week. They know, with the calm authority of someone who has done the arithmetic, that every yes to something unimportant is a no to something that matters, and they have decided, firmly and in advance, which direction that answer travels. Think for a moment about water moving through a landscape. When it is scattered, spread thin across flat, undirected ground, it produces little more than mud. It is present. It is real. But its presence alone accomplishes nothing of significance. Take that same water and direct it with intention, focus it through a narrow and deliberate channel, and it will cut through stone. The water did not change. The relationship between the water and its direction changed everything. You are the water, friend. Your hours are neither too few nor too many. They are exactly what they have always been: raw, neutral, available potential. What they become depends entirely on whether you direct them with the focused intentionality of someone who understands their value, or scatter them across the flat landscape of reaction and distraction and the comfortable illusion of busyness. The choice between those two lives is not a matter of circumstance. It is a matter of decision. And here, friend, is where the weight of all that insufficiency finally lifts. You do not need to wait for a quieter season. You do not need the calendar to clear, or the pressure to ease, or the perfect conditions to arrive before the real work begins. The real work begins the moment you decide that the time you already possess is enough, not because the demands have decreased, but because you have finally decided to meet them with direction rather than drift. Tonight, before this day closes completely, do one thing. Look honestly at tomorrow and identify the single hour, not the whole day, just 1 hour, that you will claim before anything else can spend it. Write down what that hour is for. Write down what it is not for. And then protect it tomorrow morning with the quiet, uncompromising resolve of someone who has finally understood what that hour is truly worth. Not every tomorrow will be perfect. Not every week will unfold exactly as intended. But the person who protects even one deliberate hour each morning accumulates something extraordinary across a year, something that the person waiting for more time never accumulates at all: progress. Real, visible, compounding, deeply satisfying progress. The time was always there, friend. It was always sufficient. It was always enough to begin. And the only thing that was ever missing was the decision to treat it as the precious and unrepeatable gift that it genuinely is. That decision is yours. Make it tonight. So here is what I am asking of you tonight, friend. Not someday, tonight. Before you sleep, before this broadcast fades and the ordinary world crowds back in, I want you to take 15 quiet minutes and do 4 things. Write down your one primary goal for this year. Write down 3 specific actions that would move you meaningfully toward it. Choose one of those actions and schedule it for tomorrow morning, before anything else. And then, and this is perhaps the most important step, tell yourself, firmly and sincerely, that you are a person who follows through, because you become what you repeatedly tell yourself you are. The plan is not the magic. You are the magic. The plan simply keeps you honest about who you said you wanted to be. There will be interruptions. There will be days when the plan feels distant and the distractions feel urgent. That is the ordinary friction of any worthy pursuit. But the organized person, the person with a plan they believe in, returns. They always return. They return because they know where they are going. And that, in the end, is the whole secret. Know where you are going. Write it down. Move toward it every single day. Protect that movement the way you would protect anything you cannot afford to lose. Do that, and I promise you this, when December comes again, you will not wonder where the year went. You will know exactly where it went, and you will be proud of the answer. This is Earl Nightingale. Good night and good planning.